The galaxy had grown silent, like a graveyard of stars. One by one, entire civilizations had disappeared without a single shot fired. The Vork's Imperium didn't invade with fire or fury, it simply arrived. Their ships, smooth and silent, would float into orbit. Their message came the same way every time: you are now part of the Imperium. There is no resistance. There is only order. And just like that, worlds fell. Leaders vanished. Fleets were absorbed into the machine hive. Artificial clouds blocked out suns. Cities turned gray. Billions accepted the quiet chains of obedience, afraid of what might happen if they said no. In the far corner of the galaxy, beyond the old Orion routes, a small human colony named Vega 7 waited in fear. The people looked up at the stars, knowing the Vorks were near. Orbiting the planet was an old dreadnought from the Earth War days, a massive ship named Aegis Dawn. It was outdated, its hull scratched and worn, its weapons decades behind. But it had one thing the Vorks did not expect: Captain Irina Holt. She stood at the main deck, staring at the incoming fleet of Silver Vork ships, her fingers curled around the railing. Her crew was small: a former Marine who fixed weapons with duct tape, a sarcastic engineer who used coffee cups as calibration tools, and a young pilot who had never seen real combat. They were undertrained, under-equipped, and outnumbered 1,000 to 1. But they were human. Irina received the Vork's transmission like all others had, a cold, emotionless voice demanding surrender. No threats. No shouting. Just the quiet pressure of complete control. She said nothing. Instead, she walked to the comms panel and activated the outbound channel. Her voice was calm but sharp. This corridor is closed. Humanity doesn't move for tyrants. The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew this meant war. The Vorks responded by shifting formation. 10 warships broke off and headed straight for the Aegis Dawn. The crew waited for Irina's next move, eyes wide, hands twitching. But she didn't order a retreat. Instead, she said, "Target the lead ship's thrusters. Let's make it clear we're not bluffing." The guns roared to life, and for the first time in decades, a single ship fired on the Vorks. The missile struck true, disabling the lead warship. The explosion reflected in the dark glass of the bridge. But this wasn't victory. It was defiance. The Vorks returned fire instantly. The Aegis Dawn shook. Sparks flew. Hull alarms screamed. But the crew held fast. Shields held barely. They fired back with everything they had. Flak cannons, railguns, even improvised mines launched from cargo bays. One Vork ship fell. Then another. But for every one destroyed, more arrived. Still, the Aegis Dawn refused to move. The battle turned brutal. Inside, Irina patched power lines herself, standing ankle-deep in smoke. "We don't need to win," she said, eyes fierce. "We just need to make them bleed." The ship's AI, long since outdated, began learning from the enemy's patterns. It rerouted power, predicted firing angles, adjusted shield. The engineer, hands burnt and shaking, laughed through pain. "Old girl still has teeth," he said, slamming a control panel with a wrench. Outside, the colony watched in horror and awe as the sky above lit up with fire. Families huddled in bunkers, listening to every blast. A child whispered, "Are we losing?" Her father shook his head slowly. "They haven't moved." Words spread across nearby systems. Other planets, long silenced, picked up the battle on hidden frequencies. They listened to Irina's voice echo through the stars. They saw the Aegis Dawn, battered and burning, still standing. Hope, a small, dangerous spark, ignited. But back on the ship, fuel was running low. Ammo nearly gone. Systems blinking red. "Captain," the pilot said quietly, "we can't take another wave." Irina looked out at the stars, jaw clenched. The Vork's fleet repositioned, preparing for a final strike. She knew this might be their end. But maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. "Then we make this last one count," she said. Her hand hovered over the command key for a maneuver that would drag the lead Vork ship into Vega's gravity while destroying both it and them. Her crew looked at her, not afraid, but ready. Outside, the enemy closed in. Inside, the last human warship lit up for one more fight. In the silent darkness of space, a single ship had said no. And the galaxy, for the first time in a long time, held its breath. The wreckage floated quietly over Vega 7, pieces of metal and ash drifting like snow in the cold darkness of space. The Aegis Dawn was still there, barely holding together, its hull blackened and cracked, its lights flickering like dying stars. But it had survived. Against all odds, Captain Irina Holt and her small crew had held the line, refusing to let the Vorks pass. The lead Vorks warship had been pulled into the planet's gravity, just as Irina planned, shattering into burning fragments across the sky. For a moment, the galaxy had witnessed something it hadn't seen in years: resistance. On scattered worlds where fear ruled, people leaned in close to broken radios and whispered channels, replaying the signal that had escaped before the jamming began. The message was simple: humanity had not bowed. A spark had been lit in the dark. Somewhere deep in the ghost routes of the Chintari Reach, a retired warrior named Varro heard the signal and stared long at his rusting sword. On a Mayari trade moon, a group of smugglers watched the footage of the battle and passed it hand to hand, eyes wide with disbelief. In the old halls of the Zekari monks, once thought extinct, the wind chimes rang without wind. Something had changed. But for Irina and her crew, change came with a price. Their ship was crippled. The engines were barely alive, the shields gone, and the medbay overflowing with injured. The Vorks were silent for now, but they weren't defeated. Irina stood in the command chair, pale but focused, one arm wrapped in blood-soaked bandages, watching the stars as if they might shift and attack. Her engineer, Rix, tapped at a shattered console with one good hand. "We've got power for 3 hours, maybe less. Shields are fried. Weapons down. Not much left but attitude." Irina gave a faint smile. "Then let's show them attitude." But there was something strange. The Vorks didn't strike again. Instead, their ships fell back, drifting like vultures in orbit. They were watching, not attacking, waiting. "They're studying us," said Kira, the young pilot, her voice tense. "They're trying to figure out why we didn't break." Irina nodded slowly. "Because they don't understand courage." Hours passed. Then a signal arrived, not from the Vorks, but from somewhere else. Weak, broken, barely cutting through the jamming. Rix adjusted the frequency, sweat dripping from his brow. The voice came through in pieces. "We saw your stand. We are listening." Everyone on the bridge froze. Another signal followed, this one stronger. Chintari ship offering help. Coordinates encrypted. Awaiting contact. Irina's eyes lit with fire. Help. Allies. Proof that their stand had not been silent. "Plot a course," she ordered, though the engines groaned in protest. "Even if we crawl, we move." The Aegis Dawn limped through space, a shadow of the warship it once was, but guided now by hope. They reached a hidden asteroid belt where a sleek silver vessel waited in the dark. The ship belonged to the Mayari Syndicate, known for secrecy and speed. Aboard was a tech specialist named Lenneth, who offered repairs and a strange gift: data on Vork ship codes, stolen from a captured drone. "You inspired something dangerous," she told Irina, her eyes sharp. "You made people believe again." In return, Irina offered the Aegis Dawn as a rally point. "We're not done. We're just getting started." Word spread like fire across old pirate relays and forgotten communication arrays. More signals arrived. A rogue Chintari engineer sent shield upgrades. A distant colony sent supplies via stealth drone. Even a Vorks unit broken from the hive, somehow self-aware, transmitted a message: "I do not agree. I wish to defect." Suspicion ran high, but Irina took the risk. The Vorks fragment, calling itself X-17, proved valuable, offering insights into the Imperium's tactics. "They assume fear is universal," it said. Your defiance introduces variables. Now patched and upgraded, the Aegis Dawn wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol. Across dozens of systems, resistance cells awoke from slumber. They called themselves the Flameborn, the Starbound, the Fractured Line. But most simply said, we follow the human ship. The Vorks, realizing the infection of rebellion was spreading, began tightening their grip. Entire sectors went dark. Jamming increased. Ships vanished. But every time the Vorks tried to erase hope, another signal rose. Irina sent a clear broadcast from deep in the old mining fields of Darsa Prime, where the Aegis Dawn had stopped to refuel. We are not many. We are not strong. But we are not afraid. Join us. Light the spark. And they did. One by one. Small ships. Hidden bases. Old warriors. New voices. They came not because they thought they would win, but because someone had finally dared to fight. Irina stood at the center of it, not as a hero, but as a soldier who refused to fall. Even in her quiet moments, bruised and exhausted, she stared at the stars like someone who knew they could be reclaimed. Behind her, a galaxy once broken began to breathe again. The spark had become something more. It had become fire. And the darkness was starting to notice. The galaxy was no longer quiet, but its noise came in whispers, hidden messages, coded signals, short pulses across dead channels. People began calling it the Whisper War, not because there were no battles, but because the fight now spread like secrets in the dark. The Aegis Dawn, once a forgotten relic, had become a symbol of resistance, and Captain Irina Holt its voice. But the Vorks Imperium had not forgotten the blow Vega 7 had dealt them. They moved differently now, slower, colder, more cautious. They didn't send massive fleets anymore. Instead, they hunted information. They jammed communication routes, scrambled signal relays, and planted false messages to trick or trap rebel groups. Whole cells vanished after receiving what they thought were calls for help. Irina and her crew knew this was not just war. It was a test of trust, timing, and silence. In the shadows of dead moons and broken stations, resistance groups gathered with new urgency, each carrying fragments of data, stolen weapons, or desperate warnings. The Aegis Dawn, patched and upgraded by allies from across many worlds, became the meeting point for scattered forces. They came from old mining colonies, ice-covered outposts, deep forest worlds, aliens, humans, hybrids, all willing to take a risk because someone else had done it first. But even with new allies, Irina knew the road ahead was narrow. Supplies were still low. Every new recruit brought more mouths to feed, more lives to protect, more chances of betrayal. The Vorks had begun targeting supply chains with precise strikes. Convoys disappeared mid-jump. Storage bases turned out to be traps. It was as if the enemy could see what the resistance saw. That's when X-17, the rogue Vorks fragment that had joined Irina's cause, warned them there were spies inside the movement. It spoke with its usual cold voice, but there was something urgent behind the tone. Vorks' infiltration methods are subtle. They mimic trusted patterns, behaviors, even speech. You may not detect them until it is too late. Irina gathered her most loyal fighters, held a silent meeting in a shielded room, and issued new orders. No single group would know the full mission plan. Each cell would hold only a piece, and they would rely on instinct, not data, to sense danger. It was risky, but it was human. The Vorks, logical and perfect in their calculations, struggled with things they couldn't measure: gut feelings, blind trust, and reckless courage. One mission stood out. A message had come through from the Helix Drift, a shattered region of space filled with gravitational rifts and pirate wreckage. A scientist named Ellen claimed to have found a way to block Vorks jamming tech, using frequencies found in the older human war archives. If true, it could change everything. But the signal was weak, and the location deep inside Vorks patrolled space. Irina made the call. They would go. The Aegis Dawn entered the Helix under stealth mode, its hull coated in Shintari ghost metal that bent light and sensor scans. They drifted silently through the wreckage, passing the remains of hundreds of lost ships. The tension inside the bridge was thick. Kira, The pilot guided the ship with shaking hands, dodging debris fields and energy storms. Rix, still recovering from earlier injuries, stood by the emergency power controls, ready to kill systems if needed. Hours passed with no contact. Then a signal pulsed short, old-fashioned Morse code, the kind used by early Earth explorers. It matched the coordinates. They moved in. What they found was both amazing and terrifying. Ellen was real, a young woman living in an armored lab built into the side of a dead freighter. She had created a crude but powerful system that cut through Vork's jamming by using layered analog pulses, a technique the machines couldn't interpret. But the moment they made contact, alarms blared. The Vorks had traced the signal. Within minutes, 300 drones emerged from the shadows of the drift, cutting through space like knives. The Aegis Dawn powered up its weapons, but the environment made targeting hard. They had to fight while protecting Elan and her research. The battle that followed was fast and chaotic. The drones adapted quickly, learning from every miss, every move. One sliced across the hull, breaching an outer section and sending 2 crew members into space. Irina ordered a shield pulse and used the gravity rift nearby to trap one drone, pulling it into a collapsing void. Rix managed to fire an old magnetic torpedo into another, shutting it down just long enough for Kira to ram it with a broken scout ship. The last drone went silent, then self-destructed. The lab was badly damaged, but Ellen survived, clutching her data drive like a lifeline. With her tech on board, they jumped to a secure rebel station hidden in a gas giant's outer ring. There, Irina shared the new system, and for the first time in months, secure messages flowed freely. The resistance, now called the human line by many, grew stronger. More systems lit up. More groups connected. But with growth came risk. Not everyone who joined believed in the cause. Some wanted revenge. Some wanted power. Others were plants, quiet observers reporting back to the Vorks. Irina faced betrayal when a trusted ally tried to hijack the Aegis Dawn, hoping to turn it over in exchange for mercy. He failed, but his actions left scars. Trust became harder. Sleep became shorter. Yet despite the tension, victories followed. Small bases were liberated. Vork's supply hubs raided. Captured drones reprogrammed. The fight was still uneven, but the morale had changed. People no longer fought to survive. They fought to win. And the Vorks, perfect in their logic, began to make mistakes. They sent fleets where there were no enemies. They struck decoys. They underestimated how many would rally behind a broken ship led by a stubborn woman with fire in her eyes. As the whisper war spread, Irina stood once more at the center, not with glory, but with purpose. She knew it would only get harder. The real war hadn't even begun. But she also knew something else. The galaxy had stopped whispering out of fear. Now it whispered to fight. The Orion sector had once been the heart of trade, science, and beauty in the galaxy, its stars glittering like jewels, its cities filled with culture, peace, and progress. But now it stood silent under the cold rule of the Vork's Imperium, with patrol drones circling every planet and voices hushed behind darkened windows. For years, no one dared to move there, no one dared to speak. The Vorks had made Orion a warning to the galaxy, a symbol of their quiet power where no rebellion ever stirred. But that changed the moment a small fleet, led by the battle-worn Aegis Dawn, crossed the edge of the sector with engines dimmed and weapons cold. Captain Irina Holt stared at the dead stars ahead, knowing this mission could break everything they had built or light the fire that would never die. She had received word from deep inside Orion, an old Earth listening post, long believed destroyed, had gone active for 90 seconds and sent a burst of data across rebel channels. It was a call for help, hidden in ancient Earth code, and it ended with a symbol from Earth's past, the flame of resistance. No one knew who sent it, or if it was real, but Irina believed it because she had to. The crew of the Aegis Dawn moved without speaking much. They had been through too much together to waste time on fear. Rix had repaired the jump core using parts from 3 different species ships, and it hummed like a beast ready to bite. Kira guided them through shattered orbit lanes filled with silent wrecks, where ghost signals still echoed with the last cries of ships long gone. Lenneth, the Myri tech specialist, was already scanning for the signal's source, working with X-17, the Vork's defector, who now stood almost like a shadow behind her, always watching, always thinking. They reached the coordinates, a small, broken moon hidden in the rings of a gas giant. On its surface was a facility half buried in ice, its lights flickering, its air thin and dry. Irina led the team inside, every step echoing down metal halls. And there they found him, a man named Jace Torin, a former Earth intelligence officer, long thought dead, now gaunt and pale but alive. He had survived alone for years, running a hidden network of code through the remnants of Orion's relay beacons, planting doubt, spreading confusion among the Vorks, all without being detected. "They don't expect creativity," Jace said, his voice weak but clear. "They think humans follow patterns. I gave them noise instead." He handed Irina a small device, a master key of sorts, built from ancient Earth encryption merged with Vork's algorithms, capable of unlocking the sector's old defense satellites buried deep beneath the planets. "It's not a weapon," he added. "It's a signal flare. If we light it, every hidden cell in Orion will hear it. But so will the Vorks." Irina didn't hesitate. She ordered the Aegis Dawn back into orbit and began transmitting the flare code across 7 systems. Within minutes, the galaxy shifted. On the forest moon of Vera, resistance fighters hidden for years rose from the trees and attacked a Vork's outpost. On the mining world of Dratus, engineers turned their drills into railguns and shut down power grids under Vork's control. In the floating city of Aelion, once a symbol of surrender, rebel banners were projected onto the clouds. The fire spread fast. But the Vorks responded faster. A fleet of 24 ships appeared from deep space, dropping out of warp with deadly precision, surrounding the Aegis Dawn before it could escape. They sent no message, no warning, just silence and cold weapons arming. The sky turned red as the first salvo hit. Shields failed within seconds. Kira dodged between blasts, skimming asteroid fields and diving into gravity wells, buying seconds at a time. Rix rerouted power from life support to engines, sweat pouring from his brow. X-17 guided them through a pattern he claimed the Vorks couldn't predict. Still, it wasn't enough. The ship began to break. Hull cracks formed. Systems died. Then came the unexpected help. One by one, rebel ships emerged from hiding places across Orion. Old cargo freighters with makeshift guns. Ancient patrol boats. Even a stolen Vork scout ship, now flown by pirates who had decided they preferred freedom over fear. They came without warning, without formation, but with purpose. The Vork's fleet was forced to shift, confused by the wild, erratic attacks. The rebels weren't organized like them, and that was their strength. They hit and ran, they burned and vanished, and slowly the balance tipped. Irina, though injured in the bridge collapse, refused to leave her chair. She gave orders with blood on her hands and fire in her eyes. "Don't let them regroup," she shouted. "We didn't come this far to survive. We came to win." X-17 connected with one of the old satellites and turned it against the Vorks, feeding false fleet coordinates and jamming their internal communication. Lenneth used Ellen's analog tech to break the blockade's network. Explosions painted the sky with light. One Vork's destroyer lost control and crashed into its own command ship. Another was boarded by miners with plasma torches and pure rage. By the time the dust cleared, only 5 Vork ships remained and they retreated. For the first time in decades, Orion was free. Not fully, not safely, but truly free. Fires burned on city roofs. People poured into the streets. Songs were sung, even through tears. Irina stood beside the broken edge of the Aegis Dawn's bridge, watching as light returned to a place that had only known shadow. Across the galaxy, resistance cells heard the news and dared to hope harder. The Vorks, so used to easy control, now faced something they hadn't planned for, rebellion that spread faster than fear. Irina knew this wasn't the end, if anything. It was the true beginning. They had awakened a sleeping giant, and it roared not with one voice, but with many. Orion had ignited, and the stars would never forget. The galaxy had reached a boiling point, its stars no longer silent watchers, but witnesses to the storm rising from every corner of space planets that once bowed to the Vork's Imperium now crackled with resistance, their people armed not just with weapons, but with belief, the kind that burned hotter than any engine. After Orion ignited, messages flooded the rebel network faster than they could be sorted. Voices from ice moons and desert colonies, jungle worlds, and broken cities, all saying the same thing: we're ready. The Vorks reacted with fury and fear, deploying their full force across dozens of sectors, crushing where they could, burning where they must, but the chaos only grew stronger. The Whisper War was no longer hidden. It had become a firestorm, and at the center of it all was the Aegis Dawn, battered and scorched but still flying, still fighting, carrying Captain Irina Holt and the hope of 100 species. She knew the time had come not for survival, but for a stand that could break the chains wrapped around the galaxy. They called it the Final Signal, a plan born from the fragments of ancient Earth war strategies, combined with Vork's technology stolen by X-17 and Elon's signal breakthrough. It was simple and insane. Take the fight to the core, the heart of Vork's command, where no one had ever returned from, where their throne of silence rested beneath layers of shields, defense rings, and a black sun. But the rebels wouldn't do it with one ship, they would do it with thousands. Not fleets of war, but everything that could fly. Old freighters, mining rigs, retired patrol ships, courier vessels, even sky farmers who turned crop haulers into battering rams. The goal wasn't to destroy the Vorks, it was to show them they were no longer feared. Every rebel cell was activated. Every hidden ship was called. The signal was sent in a single word now. The Vorks didn't understand at first. Their sensors reported strange movement, erratic patterns, ships that shouldn't be in flight suddenly forming clusters. They assumed it was another distraction. Then the wave hit. From all sides, the galaxy surged toward the core, and at its head was the Aegis Dawn, flanked by vessels painted with flames, stars, or symbols of freedom. Irina stood tall on the bridge, her voice steady despite the tremble in her knees. She had made peace with the idea that this mission might end her. What mattered now was what it would begin. Rix held the engines together with duct tape and fury, while Kira flew like her hands were part of the controls. Lenneth and Ellen worked together, overriding Vork systems with analog pulses and false data trails. X-17, now accepted as one of them, guided them through the patterns of the Vork's mind, predicting their traps before they were sprung. The closer they got, the harder it became. Defense rings opened fire with blinding force, tearing through the first wave of rebel ships. Cries of pain filled the comms. Still, more came. The second ring deployed drone swarms, spitting blades and plasma claws shredding smaller ships. But then came the pirate flotilla, led by an exiled prince who once ruled a moon of thieves. They hacked the drones, turned them on their masters. On the third ring, the Vorks unleashed their hounds, biomechanical horrors bred for space combat. But Chintari warriors, once thought lost, returned in cloaked ships and launched silent torpedoes that cut through the beasts like glass. And finally, there was the Black Sun itself, a dying star caged by the Vorks to power their fortress. Irina had one final move. X-17 had warned her that the Black Sun was unstable. If they overloaded its regulators, it would not explode, it would scream. Its energy would pulse across every Vork's frequency, breaking their links, severing their unity. The cost would be high. The Aegis Dawn would have to fly into the regulator chamber and stay long enough to finish the sequence. It was a death run. Rix didn't ask for permission, he just set the course. Kira stayed in the pilot's seat, knuckles white. Irina looked at each of them and gave a nod, not as a captain, but as a friend. "We light the fire," she said. "Let the galaxy remember." The ship dove into the storm, its hull cracking from the pull of the Black Sun, systems failing one by one. They reached the chamber. Ellen screamed as she activated the final override, and the signal launched. Across the core, Vork's units paused. They stuttered, broke pattern. Ships collided. Drones spun out of control. The fortress shuddered, lights blinking. In that moment, the galaxy stood still, not in silence, but in choice. Worlds under occupation watched their masters falter. Chains flickered and fell. On every planet, people stepped forward. They rose with whatever they had: rocks, rifles, courage. And they fought. The Vorks tried to regroup, but it was too late. Their unity was broken. Their logic fractured. The rebellion had become something else. It wasn't just humans. It wasn't just the Flameborn or the fractured line. It was everyone who had ever dreamed of freedom. When the black sun finally collapsed into itself, the Aegis dawn was gone. A shockwave rippled through space, not of destruction but of release. Light returned to corners long forgotten. Across the stars, voices rose not in mourning, but in song. Statues were built not of stone, but of light and story. And at their center, always, was the shape of a ship that had refused to move. Captain Irina Holt became more than a name. She became the moment the galaxy stood, not in fear, not in surrender, but together.